So, welcome back to session 2 of Unit 509 on finance, and we're going to start looking at budgets. But first, let's clarify, budgets are all about planning the future results by coordinating our efforts to allocate resources to achieve the best results and meet our goals, and they're all based on forecasts, so the probable future, as we've just examined in session 1. So setting these budgets is about building on that forecasting we've just discussed and the financial governance. Without that forecasting, these budgets will probably be useless, and without the governance and the management, we would have little historic data to help us to base those, to forecast for basing those budgets on. So it's all interrelated and all needs to be done together. So before we get going, let's have a look at the aims and objectives. The aim is to know how to set a budget. And by the end of the session, you should be able to explain the process of setting a budget, identify the information needed to set a realistic budget, explain how to set contingency within a budget, and analyse the factors to be taken into account to secure the support of stakeholders. Business planning is generally conducted annually, and although the arrangements and practices will differ from organisation to organisation, the sort of annual business planning cycle is likely to cover a review and prioritisation of strategic priorities, so strategic planning, the development of the plan and then ops plans for each area of the business, the allocation of resources, including setting and agreeing budgets so that it can deliver targets and objectives and ensure that what has been agreed is delivered. And on budgets, the approach could be top down, where the main input is from the top level executives of the organisation. They set the guidelines according to which budgets and what financial goals and details and plans they have. And really they control it all, and lower management is given the least amount of participation in the budgeting process. They're really just there to execute what they've been given. Or it could be bottom up, a much more inclusive approach towards budgeting process. Although the senior executives are still going to be setting out the general guidelines related to the budget, the employees and the lower management are more involved in formulating rather than just executing. Each department forms its budget along the guidelines that have been issued by senior execs, and then it's all brought together to bring the overall budgets for the organisation together. The bottom-up approach is highly inclusive. The employees tend to be more committed towards working to the budget because due to the fact that they've been involved in the participation of drawing up the budget, know what was going on, therefore they find it acceptable. Whichever process is used, the budgeting process will be different in different organisations, but there are some key steps that will generally be followed in some sort of form, and they are researching of costs, project revenues, calculating gross profit, calculating cash flow projections, and then considering the environment, any trends or seasons or economies, anything from the forecasting, confirming the sort of resources available, involving stakeholders and suppliers to discuss costings and make sure everybody's on board and engaged, discussing with department heads, team leaders, SMEs, accounts departments to get their input into the budget. And again, if it's bottom up, there's going to be much more of that. 9, planning some contingency, and then finally gaining agreement or approval, and there needs to be time included for reviewing it there. And then finally, I suppose after that, there's planning reviews into the budget so that it can be reviewed at certain stages, and that can be put into the policy or the governance, and we'll look at that in a little bit more detail later. And whilst going through that process, going to face a number of challenges. Now, obviously, they're going to be different again in every situation, but number of challenges, common ones we're going to face, and there's ways of dealing with them. And the first one could be that there is no accurate forecasting or assumptions, or they're inaccurate. And that may be that the financial governance has not been good enough, so the information isn't there, or people just haven't bothered doing it. And if that's the case, the challenge is that it's going to take time and be very hard to do if the information wasn't there, so you've got to go back and trawl back through things. And the solution could be that we make sure we're checking that it's part of the financial governance, that it's embedded, that the systems are there to mathematically link things together and record things and create detailed budgeting and forecasting and the planning models, and that it's all standardized and that guidance is given to people to help them sort of bring it through as a natural process, which will be reducing errors and saving time and money and making it just part of the normal day-to-day activities. Next challenge is getting everyone on board with your budget. It's much easier if everyone's on board and everybody understands what's going on. We talked before about things becoming part of the normal working practices, and if everyone can be involved in the budget as normal working practices, it's going to be much better because people who are involved respect things more and they perform better. And transparency is the key here. Everyone who needs to, all the employees, should be able to know the steps of the budgeting process and be involved in it, see how it's going. If possible, allow them to have some say, team leads or whatever, in how you're setting the budget and what's going in there. And then they might be, at the very least, if not deciding how the money's spent, they'll understand why you've done things the way you are and feel that they're part of it, and then be more likely to follow and keep to it. And next is setting goals. It's easy to set goals, and there'll always be some financial goals, but we want to make sure it's something that we can actually work towards. Determining how strict you want to be and how challenging you want them to be is an issue. Do we want to set our targets so high that it's a real struggle to meet them, or do we want to set something that we feel we can meet without sort of breaking our backs? Perhaps there needs to be a middle ground. Maybe we need to be looking at where we set contingency and talking about three sorts of budgets: a best case, a worst case scenario, an ideal scenario. But we just need to be aware that if we set a target too high and we fall way short, even though we may have kept within what we would a reasonable amount, we may be seen to have failed, and it can be very demotivating for people. And finally, to pick up there where we said that setting a high target and not reaching it can demotivate people, using a budget to motivate staff can be a double-edged sword, because money is an emotive subject for staff, particularly. And if you need you're going to need their support to keep to your budget. So don't shift the numbers around to make it look good and then think, I'll deal with the issues when it comes up, because that's going to cause you problems. And remember, if performance to the budget will result in some sort of bonus or credit for your staff or promotion perhaps for yourself, then take care and be very careful with the numbers. And as part of that process, you're probably going to need to negotiate to make changes to the proposed budget. And this can be difficult, but being clear on some key factors can help you. And the first of those is back up all your decisions. You need to be able to justify what you've included for all the items in your budget. This might mean explaining that it links to business objectives and how your expenditure on your item will help you realise them. The budget may be better received if you can show that its planned expenditure is linked to strategic objectives. Be prepared to define the impact that reducing your budget may have. If they're saying you're going to have less money, you need to be able to clearly show the impact it will have on strategic objectives. It's important that you can stress this, and then it might help you get the appropriate budget, or at least have identified why you feel it's not going to be sufficient to meet those objectives. Use cost-benefit analysis. If there's key budget items where you haven't chosen the cheapest option that's available, it's important that you clearly sort of explain the thinking behind your decision. So cost-benefit analysis can be a useful way to sort of demonstrate that as like a business proposal. And that all can help to build trust, and it's important that you produce a true budget rather than manipulating things just to satisfy people or get what you want. That's going to come back to bite you. It really is about justifying things, and it's not about getting your budget approved first time. You may have to go through negotiations, and things like deliberately overestimating costs because you think it's going to get knocked back and then you'll get what you actually wanted in the end. It just doesn't work. You need to inspire trust in your capabilities, and honesty and truthfulness is always the best policy. And that leads into making sure that it's accurate. Ensure that your figures have been produced are accurate and you haven't made any mathematical errors or unreasonable assumptions in your calculations. Because if you have, and this is detected, it will just raise doubts in that trust and the accuracy and viability of your overall budget. And that leads to focusing on your business management or your budget management skills. If people know you're keeping a good control of your budget, regularly monitoring it and taking actions on variances, then they'll know you've got those good financial management skills that we just mentioned. And when it comes to negotiating changes in your budget, you're more likely to get your way or get additional money or save yourself from having some cutbacks if your senior sort of people think that you manage your funds well and therefore you understand what you need and when you might need it. And finally, as within any negotiation, you need to be prepared to compromise. You need to know your budget, and when you're negotiating, it's unlikely that you're going to get all the requests that you want or win all the arguments. It's a good idea to have worked out beforehand the aspects of your budget that are most important to you. So you may have used something like we talked about in project management, critical path analysis, and worked out which are the critical tasks which are going to keep your department or your sort of project on time, and they're the ones that you can't compromise on, and no others that you can. In that way, when you enter into the negotiations, you will feel prepared, less likely to panic, and have some room for manoeuvring, because your part of negotiation is sometimes you're going to have to do a bit of giving and taking. And just before we do an activity, I just want to sort of outline the main components that are going to be included in your budget as you're setting it. And they may be titled differently because you'll have organisational templates, but the components are really still the same. And there's two real main ones, and that's the income and expenditure. So income is going to be sales, interest, dividends, royalties, any capital earned. Anything you've earned as a business or on a departmental scale, it's going to be what you've allocated, what's already budgeted from other areas, and that all needs to be included, and it'll be different depending on the organisation and how your budgets are run. And then there's the expenditure, the next main component. So list all the expenses for the year, fixed and variable, and these are all going to be useful to help calculate spending areas that can perhaps be cut in slow periods, or where we can reschedule production or overheads to sort of smooth out our outgoings. So that's the two main components, and there'll be others. Overhead production costs. So this will be where you're identifying costs directly tied to making each output product, delivery of each service, so you can help with pricing or product, pricing the product or the service to see where, if there's any problems or if it's on target. There'll be net income and loss. So you might want to do this each month and for the year. You can then total the income and expenses by month to show income and loss each month, and or by category of the department or the company, so you can show how each one is performing, which one's performing better than others, and you can use those to track your total income and expenses. And then projected performance, and this component's just going to be about giving a projected total to show how you'll end up at the end of the year if you continue performing at the agreed levels and of income and spending that you've set in your budget. So generally just the main components that'll be contained within that budget. So we've reached the midway point through this session, and we're going to do a quick activity. So base this on research in your own organisation, because you've got to explain the budget setting process, and we've talked about it generally, but you need to provide an account and the reasons for the practices that go on. So you need to check if you don't know, or go through how you go through the process of setting the budget, agreeing it, getting it finalised, negotiating it, etc., and explain the practices. And as part of that, you should be making sure that you include all the steps that we showed in our quick sort of generalistic thing about the steps that should go through the process, and outline how they fit in with what you've done. So research your organisation and find out what the budget setting process is for you. You may find that if your governance is good, that you've got process and procedures, that there's stuff there that you can utilise, but it's evaluating it and giving the reasons why and the practices and linking them to the steps we've discussed.